The rain had been falling for hours over the Irish countryside, washing the soil into dark rivers that trickled through the cracks of an ancient stone circle. Dr. Fiona Graves stood at the edge of the excavation site, her boots sinking into the mud, her breath visible in the frigid air. The storm had driven her entire team indoors, but Fiona stayed behind, driven by something she couldn't explain, a whisper that had haunted her dreams ever since she'd found the site on an old, unmarked map. When her trowel hit something solid, the sound was soft but unmistakable. She froze. Carefully, she brushed away the wet earth until a shape began to emerge. A mask, blackened and cracked, its surface carved with curling runes that shimmered faintly under the beam of her headlamp. The air around her seemed to grow heavier, colder. The moment her fingers touched the mask, a pulse of warmth shot through it. Impossible, as if the object had a heartbeat. The rain ceased to matter. The world fell silent, except for the faint echo of something that sounded like breathing. She lifted the mask from the soil, and a streak of lightning illuminated the circle. For a fraction of a second, she saw figures, shadowy silhouettes standing among the stones, their heads crowned with animal skulls, watching her in perfect stillness. Then, as quickly as they appeared, they were gone. Fiona stumbled back, clutching the mask. Her mind told her it was exhaustion, stress, perhaps the tricks of the storm. But when she looked down again, she noticed something strange. The mask was smoldering, as if it had only just been removed from fire centuries old. That night, as she returned to her tent, the whispers began. At first, faint, like wind rustling through tall grass. Then clearer, the words ancient and rhythmic, carrying tones of worship and fear. Fiona recorded them on her phone, but when she played them back, the device emitted only static. Every light in her tent flickered, then went out. In the sudden darkness, she felt it again, the faint warmth against her skin, though the mask lay several feet away. The runes seemed to glow, alive in the dark, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Against every rational thought, Fiona reached out. The instant her hand brushed it, pain flared through her palm. She gasped, yanking her hand back, but it was too late. A symbol had burned itself into her flesh, the same twisting mark carved into the mask's surface. The storm outside intensified. The stones around the site hummed with a low, resonant tone that seemed to rise from beneath the earth itself. Fiona stumbled to the doorway of her tent, staring toward the circle. The mask, now resting where she'd dropped it, seemed to shift, its hollow eye sockets reflecting a faint, orange glow. For the first time in her career, Fiona Graves, the woman who'd unearthed tombs older than history itself, felt something deeper than fear. She felt recognition. The mask wasn't an artifact. It was awake. The hollowing moon. The mask sat beneath a glass case in Dr. Fiona Graves' lab, surrounded by the hum of machines and sterile white light. Yet even in this modern space, it felt wrong. The runes still pulsed faintly, the blackened surface seeming to drink in every shadow. Fiona had triple-sealed the room, isolated it from the rest of the university, and installed thermal sensors. But no matter what she did, the readings made no sense. The mask emitted a steady internal heat, though it had no visible power source. She hadn't told anyone about the mark on her hand. Beneath her glove, the burn had stopped hurting, but sometimes, when she stood too close to the mask, it tingled, as though something unseen were reaching back. For days, Fiona immersed herself in research. Celtic folklore, early Samhain rites, sacred thresholds between the living and the dead, all of it led to the same unsettling conclusion. Samhain wasn't a celebration. It was a negotiation. The Celts had believed the dead demanded something in return for keeping the living safe each year. And somewhere in the footnotes of an ancient manuscript, Fiona found a symbol matching the one branded on her palm, the mark of passage. It was said to belong to a chosen intermediary, someone bound to walk between worlds. Her blood ran cold. That night, the university prepared for a rare lunar eclipse. Outside her window, students gathered in the courtyard with telescopes and laughter, but in Fiona's lab, everything felt heavy, oppressive. The mask sat silently in its case, yet every light flickered as the moon began to darken. Then came the hum, low at first, like an echo from underground, then rising in pitch until it resonated through the glass. Fiona backed away, her instruments blinking red. The computers failed, lights died, and for a single heartbeat, all sound vanished. Then her reflection moved. She stood frozen before the observation glass, watching her own silhouette in the darkness. But her reflection wasn't mirroring her. It was delayed, shifting seconds later. Behind that reflection, another figure appeared, tall, faceless, wearing the mask. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly amber. Its hand rose in a slow, deliberate motion, mirroring the mark on Fiona's palm. She spun around, but the room was empty. When she turned back, the figure was gone, and her reflection was normal once more. Only the mask remained in its case, completely still. Breathing hard, Fiona reached for the light switch. The bulbs flared violently, and for a fraction of a second, the walls were covered in shadowy imprints, as if countless figures stood around her, their outlines flickering like afterimages. And then, silence again. She sank to the floor, shaking. Whatever she had unearthed beneath the stones was more than a relic. It was a remnant of something waiting, something that now knew her name. Fiona didn't sleep that night. Outside, the moon turned the color of rust, and in the reflection of her window, faintly, just before dawn, the masked figure watched her one last time, then vanished with the light. The Festival of Fire. The plane descended through a curtain of fog over County Meath, Ireland, land of standing stones, ancient fields, and restless myths. Dr. Fiona Graves pressed her palm against the airplane window, the faint burn of the rune mark throbbing beneath her glove. Every time the engines shuddered, the mark pulsed, as if reacting to something below. It had been weeks since the night of the eclipse. Fiona's nights were restless, her dreams filled with flickering bonfires and masked figures dancing beneath a blood-red moon. But the strangest part was the music, low, rhythmic drums that seemed to echo even after she woke. She was no longer sure which world she was waking into. Her destination was the small village of Kilcarn, near the Hill of Ward, the legendary birthplace of Samhain. Local folklore claimed the Celts had once lit immense fires there to guide spirits home. To Fiona, it was a potential archaeological treasure trove. To the villagers, it was sacred ground, never to be disturbed. The locals greeted her politely, but with wary eyes. An old woman at the inn muttered blessings under her breath whenever Fiona passed. In the pub, men stopped talking when she entered. Even the air felt ancient here, thick with stories that had never fully died. That night, she met with the village priest, Father Malachi, a man whose thin frame seemed as weathered as the church he served. His eyes, though kind, carried a knowledge that made Fiona uneasy. "You've brought something with you, haven't you?" he asked quietly, as if already knowing. "A mask," Fiona admitted. "Charred, ancient, possibly pre-Celtic." "Then God help you, child," the priest whispered. "You've stirred what our ancestors buried in fire." He handed her a bundle of yellowed papers, their edges brittle with age. They were records from the 1600s, translations of much older texts. One line, in particular, froze her blood. To keep the harvest whole, the gate must feed. One life for 1 year of peace. The implication was horrifying. Samhain had not been a mere harvest celebration, it was a bargain. The Celts had offered blood to keep their world safe from what lingered beyond. Later that night, lightning rolled across the hills. Fiona returned to her rented cottage, studying the documents by candlelight. As thunder rumbled, she felt drawn to the window. In the distance, atop the Hill of Ward, she saw it, a faint orange glow. A fire. She threw on her coat and hiked up the hill through rain and mud. The closer she got, the stronger the humming in her hand became. At the summit, she found a stone altar blackened by centuries of ash, and something lying at its center. A sealed envelope, its wax unbroken, bearing her name. She tore it open, her heart racing. Inside was a letter written in elegant handwriting that seemed impossibly old. "You were never meant to find it, Fiona. The seal weakens. The fires must burn again." Below the text, a single symbol, the same rune marked on her hand, had been drawn in fresh ink. A cold wind whipped across the hill, and when Fiona looked up, the bonfire was gone. The altar was cold, but the smell of smoke lingered. The lantern keepers. The fog in Kilcarn had grown thicker since Fiona's discovery on the hill. It hung low and heavy, clinging to the streets like breath on glass. She hadn't slept for days. Her dreams were full of fire and chanting, and every time she woke, the smell of smoke lingered in her hair. By morning, she found a plain envelope slipped under her cottage door. Inside was a single black card embossed with a symbol, a lantern surrounded by runes, and a line of text written in careful script. "We've been expecting you. Tonight." The inn's cellar. Her first instinct was fear. Her second, curiosity. The name the lantern keepers had appeared several times in the old texts Father Malachi gave her, always in footnotes, always described as the watchers of the gate. At midnight, Fiona descended the steps of the inn into the cold stone cellar. The smell of damp earth mixed with candle wax and something faintly metallic. Dozens of lanterns hung from the ceiling, their flames casting swaying shadows on the walls. At the far end of the room stood a tall man in a dark coat, Elias Crow. His presence was commanding yet strangely calm, his eyes pale and piercing. "Dr. Graves," he said, his voice soft but certain. "You've done what many before you failed to do. You've awakened it." "Awakened what?" she demanded. "The veil," he replied. "The boundary our ancestors bound with fire and ritual. Samhain was not a celebration, it was containment. And now, it begins to unravel." Fiona's pulse quickened. "What do you want from me?" "To finish what your bloodline began." The room grew colder. Elias explained that the keepers were not a cult but an order, founded centuries ago to protect the living world from the spirits sealed away during the first Samhain. The mask, he said, was one of 7 relics used to bind the gate between life and death. And when Fiona unearthed it, she had unknowingly broken one of the seals. "You felt it, haven't you?" Elias asked. "The mark on your hand. It burns when the veil thins." "It's not a curse, it's a key." Fiona's throat tightened. "Then help me seal it again." Elias' expression darkened. "We intend to. But there are others, those who see the gate as a door to power. We are not the only ones watching." He handed her a folder. Inside were photographs, her excavation site, her university lab, even candid shots of her walking through Kilcarn streets. She flipped to the last image and froze. It was Elias, standing beside her excavation tent. The photo was dated 1894. Her heart stopped. "That's impossible." Elias smiled faintly. "You'll come to understand soon enough. Time doesn't flow cleanly where the veil thins." Before she could respond, every lantern flickered violently. The flames bent sideways, as though pulled by some invisible wind. A low hum filled the room, vibrating through the walls. Elias raised his hand, signaling silence. "It's found us," he whispered. The lanterns extinguished all at once, plunging the cellar into darkness. And from that blackness came a voice, not human, but ancient, whispering through the dark. "The fires will burn again." The curse of the binding runes. The morning after her meeting with Elias Crow, Fiona awoke to an uneasy silence in her Kilcarn cottage. The storm from days before had faded, leaving only the lingering damp smell of mud and smoke. But inside, something darker hung in the air. She spread out the manuscripts and sketches she had collected, the charred mask, the letter from Father Malachi, the notes Elias had given her, and tried to make sense of the runes burned into her hand. They weren't just symbols. They were a map, an intricate code woven into the very fabric of Samhain traditions. Jack-o'-lanterns, masks, trick-or-treat. Every modern custom was part of a binding ritual, meant to hold the dead at bay for one night each year. And each ritual, Fiona realized with a shiver, had been diluted over centuries, its original power weakened, but never completely destroyed. She pored over photographs of children celebrating Halloween across the centuries, noting the subtle patterns, carved faces, offerings of food, costumes meant to confuse the spirits. It was meticulous. It was deliberate. And now, the ritual was failing. Her assistant, Marcus, had agreed to help her catalog the runes and track their manifestations in modern society. But that afternoon, her phone buzzed with a single, chilling message. "You should see what we found." When Fiona arrived at Marcus's apartment, she froze. The door was ajar. Inside, papers were scattered across the floor, and the smell of iron hung in the air. Marcus lay on the ground, eyes wide, face carved with symbols identical to the mask's runes. His hand clutched a notebook filled with frantic sketches, warnings and translations he had been too afraid to speak aloud. The realization hit Fiona like a thunderclap. This wasn't random violence. This was a message. Somewhere, the force that had branded her hand, that haunted the mask, was reaching further. It was selecting, punishing those who tried to interfere. Her own mark throbbed painfully, and in its heat, visions flickered across her mind. Masked figures circling bonfires, the flames reflecting in their hollow eyes. Offerings placed on stone altars, the unmistakable sense of something waiting beneath it all. Elias had told her that she was a key. But now, witnessing Marcus's death, Fiona realized the truth was far more terrifying. The key could be used, willingly or not, to open the gate entirely. Outside, the wind howled across the village, rattling windows like skeletal fingers. Inside, the shadows seemed to stretch toward her, alive, whispering in that same ancient tongue she had first heard with the mask. Fiona sank to the floor, clutching her burning palm. The weight of history pressed down upon her, centuries of rituals, sacrifices, and secrets, and she understood that Samhain was no longer a story from the past. It was a living curse, bleeding into the present, and she was at its center. The mask waited. And now, so did the world. Blood and the candy. Halloween in Kilcarn began like any other, streets alive with children in costumes, the air thick with laughter and the sweet tang of candy. But to Fiona Graves, the joy was hollow. Her hand throbbed beneath the glove, the rune mark pulsing with every scream of delight from trick-or-treaters. She could feel the veil thinning, the boundaries between the living and the dead stretching like fragile silk. Reports started trickling in almost immediately. Children collapsing after biting candy, pets attacking their owners without warning, shadows moving in corners that should have held only light. Fiona watched the news in horror, video clips of suburban neighborhoods, of families opening chocolate bars and gasping as black liquid oozed from the wrappers. Her mind raced. The mask, the runes, the rituals, all the warnings from Father Malachi, Elias Crow, the manuscripts, they weren't just historical curiosities. They were instructions for survival. She raced to a local store, examining shelves of candies adorned with smiling pumpkins and witches. Her fingers shook as she traced the wrappers. Then she froze. A faint logo, almost imperceptible, appeared on every tainted sweet. A stylized lantern. The Lantern Keepers. Panic gripped her chest. The society that claimed to protect humanity was now orchestrating the very chaos they had sworn to prevent. Somehow, the corrupted treats were a vessel, a conduit to spread the weakening of the veil across the town, across the world. Her phone buzzed with a message from Elias. It's spreading faster than we feared. The children are the vessels. You must act. Fiona grabbed her coat and sprinted through the rainy streets. Windows reflected shadows that moved on their own, shapes that weren't human creeping along the curbs. Children laughed, oblivious, holding sweets that were now tiny gateways for what lurked beyond. She reached a group of kids in the park. One boy, dressed as a skeleton, held a chocolate bar to his mouth, but when he unwrapped it, a black fluid trickled down his fingers, hissing as it touched the ground. Shadows immediately coalesced, forming grotesque figures that twisted and swirled around him, reaching toward Fiona with invisible hands. Her own mark burned violently. She realized, every mask, every candy, every costume, it was all part of the ancient binding ritual. And now the ritual was unraveling. As the wind whipped through the trees, Fiona's heart sank. She understood the terrifying truth. The veil had not just thinned, it had begun to fracture. And somewhere in the darkness, the faintest whisper reached her ears. Trick or treat. It was not a question. It was a summons. The 13th Bonfire. The night air in Kilcarn was sharp with frost, carrying the acrid scent of smoke from bonfires long extinguished, or so Fiona thought. She trudged through the mud, her boots heavy, her gloves soaked, clutching the charred mask like a talisman. The rune on her palm throbbed in time with her heartbeat, a painful reminder that the veil was no longer just thinning, it was fraying. Elias Crow had been clear. The 13th Bonfire must be lit. Every 700 years, it was the keystone of the Samhain seal. And now, the Lantern Keepers had their own plan, to use the fire not to contain the spirits, but to unlock the gate entirely, harnessing the dead as instruments of power. Fiona reached the summit of a hill shrouded in fog. 7 stone altars circled the clearing, charred black from centuries of ritual. Shadows flickered along their surfaces, coalescing and dissolving as if alive. She sensed a presence behind her and spun around. Elias was there, his expression grim. "You must understand, Fiona," he said quietly. "The fire is not just fire. It is life, sacrifice, and blood. Without it, the veil collapses." "But if the lantern keepers light it their way," Fiona began, but her words caught in her throat as she saw figures emerging from the fog. Hooded men and women carried torches, their faces hidden, chanting in a tongue older than the hills. The air vibrated with power. Fiona's mark seared painfully, a pulse that seemed to reach deep into her bones. Then came the whisper, echoing in her mind. "You are the key." Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. "Your ancestor was the original priestess who sealed Samhain. Your blood is the final bond. Only you can choose which way the ritual ends." Fiona's stomach turned. Centuries of history weighed on her shoulders. Every carving, every offering, every festival. She saw it now, connecting like threads in a tapestry of fire and blood. The lantern keepers raised the first torch toward the 13th altar. Flames licked the dry stone, and the fog swirled violently as ghostly shapes began to emerge. Faces of the lost, the sacrificed, the forgotten. They drifted toward the bonfire, drawn like moths to flame. Fiona's vision blurred. She saw herself, a young priestess in ancient garb, placing her own hands over the fire. The mask, once a relic, now hovered before her, alive with power. Elias's voice broke through the visions. "This is the choice. Seal the gate, or unleash it. The spirits will obey only one." The bonfire flared higher, illuminating the swirling forms around her. The chanting grew louder, a crescendo that threatened to shatter reality itself. Fiona's hands trembled, the rune mark throbbing violently. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the fire, of the chanting, of the ancient spirits pressing against the veil. For the first time, she understood. She could end it, or she could doom the world. And the gate, it waited. The children of the veil. Halloween night descended on Kilcarn like a living shadow, thick and suffocating. The streets were full of children in costumes, laughter echoing like distant bells. But Fiona Graves saw only the faint shimmer of something else beneath the celebration. Her hand burned relentlessly, the rune mark pulsating with every heartbeat, as if syncing with a force beyond comprehension. Every flicker of torchlight, every reflection in shop windows, hinted at shapes that didn't belong. Ghostly figures slithered through the edges of her vision, silent, observing, waiting. She tried to warn people. She knocked on doors, tried to gather the town council, but no one saw what she saw. To them, Halloween was harmless fun. To her, it was a gathering of vessels. The children, they were not just children. Fiona followed a group into a narrow alley, where the air had grown impossibly cold. The street lamps flickered, shadows stretching unnaturally. One girl, no older than 10, wore a simple witch costume, but her movements were strange, precise, almost ritualistic. When Fiona called her name, the child turned, and her voice came not in laughter but in an ancient Celtic tongue, sharp and commanding. "Fiona, priestess." The veil falters. "You must act." Fiona staggered backward. Her niece, her sweet, playful niece, dressed in black felt and a pointed hat, was speaking in the language of the dead. The rune mark seared like molten fire, her visions blending the past and present. She saw centuries of masked figures dancing, offering, sacrificing. Every masked child she'd observed before, their innocent costumes, their laughter, were conduits for spirits pressing against the veil. She realized the horrifying truth. Each child was a vessel, unknowingly hosting the soul of someone trapped beyond. The ancient rites were alive in the modern world, hidden behind sugar, masks, and joy. From the shadows, a faint whisper rose. "The chosen will bind or release." Fiona clutched her burning palm, tears running down her cheeks. Fear, guilt, and determination collided. She understood now that the battle was no longer against Elias, or even the lantern keepers. It was against time and the spirits themselves. The wind howled through the alley, rattling windows, carrying the laughter of children that was no longer theirs. The veil quivered. Shapes moved within it, hungry, impatient, whispering, unseen. Fiona's resolve hardened. She could no longer be a mere observer. She had to act, or let the next generation become part of a cycle that had lasted 700 years. And somewhere, beyond the flickering streetlights, the massed shadows gathered, waiting for the final choice. The night of reckoning. The moon rose, full and blood-red, casting Kilcarn in a hellish light. The wind carried whispers, faint at first, then swelling into a chorus of ancient voices that pressed against the walls of Fiona Graves' mind. Every heartbeat echoed with the thrum of the 13th Bonfire, ignited somewhere atop the hill where the first Samhain sacrifices had taken place centuries ago. Fiona stumbled through the fog-choked streets, the rune mark on her palm ablaze with searing heat. The mask, carried in her trembling hands, seemed alive, its hollow eyes reflecting a fire only she could see. Shadows danced along the edges of the fog, twisting and coalescing into grotesque shapes that mimicked human forms. The lantern keepers were waiting. Hooded figures formed a circle around the ancient stone altar, chanting in the old tongue. At the center, Elias Crow stood, holding the mask's twin relics aloft, his pale eyes glowing with unnatural light. "Welcome, Fiona," he said, voice calm but edged with menace. "Tonight, the gate opens fully. All that has been contained will be free, and you will decide its fate." She stepped forward, her mind reeling. Every instinct screamed to destroy the mask, to end the ritual, but she knew that if she acted rashly, the spirits would consume everything. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and something darker, metallic and ancient. Then the ground trembled. The shadows became forms, rising from the earth, faces of the long dead, eyes hollow, mouths moving in silent wails. They pressed toward the altar, toward the flames, toward her. Fiona realized the truth. No mortal could control them. The lantern keepers had underestimated the very force they sought to command. Her hand burned violently. The rune mark pulsed as though alive, and in a flash of clarity, she understood what she had to do. She lifted the charred mask and pressed it to her face. Pain seared through her skull, visions of centuries past flooding her mind. The original priestess, standing before the fire, raising her hands over the flames. The masked dancers circling in rhythm, the blood sacrifices offered to bind the gate. And then, her own reflection within the mask, merging with the past. The chanting ceased. Time seemed to fracture. Shadows froze mid-motion, then dissolved. The spirits hovered for a heartbeat, awaiting her choice. Fiona's voice, not entirely her own, whispered the words of binding. "The gate is closed. The veil restored." A blinding light erupted from the mask. The lantern keepers screamed, stumbling back as the wind tore through the altar circle. Ghostly faces, once pressing close, drifted silently upward, vanishing into the night. The flames of the 13th Bonfire sputtered and died, leaving only smoke and silence. Fiona fell to her knees, the mask slipping from her grasp. Her palm still burned, but the pulse was fading. The world outside seemed still. Safe. For now. But deep in the shadows, a whisper lingered, echoing faintly in the night. The gate never closes forever. The final trick. Months had passed since the blood-red moon and the night of the 13th Bonfire. Kilcarn returned to its quiet, fog-laden streets. Children ran through neighborhoods in bright costumes, their laughter ringing out as if nothing had ever happened. Fiona Graves walked among them, exhausted but alive, her hand carefully wrapped to hide the faint scar of the rune mark. The lantern keepers had vanished, the masks and relics secured, or so she believed. The veil was restored, the spirits bound once more. Fiona tried to resume her life, burying herself in research, cataloging the events she had survived. But at night, the whispers returned, soft, teasing, like smoke curling around her thoughts. It was Halloween again. She wandered past a pumpkin patch at the edge of town, the moon casting silver light over the orange glow of carved faces. Children laughed nearby, their costumes reflecting centuries of ritual she now understood too well. Then she saw it. A small group of kids huddled around something strange. One child held a pumpkin, and inside it, a glowing mask, blackened and rune-etched, pulsing faintly in the moonlight. Curiosity drew Fiona closer. The child, oblivious to her presence, picked up the mask and slipped it over their face. The laughter stopped. The air thickened. Shadows coalesced. And then, the child's voice shifted, low and whispering. carrying tones no mortal should speak. The gate never closes forever. Fiona's heart froze. She had thought it was over, that she had ended the curse. But centuries of history and sacrifice proved otherwise. The mask, the rituals, the veil, they were never truly defeated, only delayed. The children's shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting into forms that flickered between life and death. The wind carried a voice that was both familiar and alien, echoing from the very stone circles Fiona had studied. And the game begins anew. She looked around, the orange glow of pumpkins flickering like embers in a dark wind. Somewhere in the distance, faintly, a figure watched, masked, still alive, still waiting. Fiona turned away, realizing the truth she could never escape. Halloween was not a holiday. It was a threshold, and every year, the gate would beckon again. And the question would always remain, whispered in the streets, behind the innocent words. Trick or treat. The night swallowed her fear. The shadows waited. And the world, once safe, was just beginning to remember.